Kathy, first of all, great to see you live from NSCP. I hear you just wrapped up a panel, and that panel was largely focused on the evolution of compliance. But before we get into that, can you just give me a little bit of a sense of what's the energy like in the room? What is the scuttlebutt? What are people in compliance concerned about this year?
So the energy in the room is off the charts. Everybody is super engaged, so excited to be here. It's such a great conference this year. I'm also very stoked to be here. And the biggest topics of conversation for everybody across the board is AI.
I figured. And speaking of AI
Yeah.
and evolution, can you touch on some of the themes that were addressed by your panel? What were some of the topics that came up?
So my panel talked mostly about broker dealers and registered investment advisors as dual registrants. So a dual registrant is someone who has a broker dealer and a registered investment advisor, maybe more than one. And so we were talking about the problems that they have every day doing their business.
What kind of problems were you hearing?
By far, the most touted issues were resources and lack of technology.
So, if I had to guess, would I say that teams are feeling understaffed, overwhelmed, and not equipped with the proper tools in order to get their jobs done most efficiently?
That is exactly everybody's issue. Yes.
And in the spirit of the evolution of compliance, did you hear any solutions that got you excited? And I don't want to be too biased and plug our solution too hard, but have you heard any ways that maybe some other firms, other technologies, or that just the industry as a whole is trying to address these?
So there were a lot of complaints about some of the existing vendors in the space, especially on the e-com side,
Hmm.
with the need for text and, doing WhatsApp and all of those things. So there's a lot of frustrations with the current vendors and how they're doing it. And the desire is to find somebody new that could potentially help them in new and different ways.
So
Of
that
course, that partners perfectly with our partnership with MirrorWeb, which because they do those things so well.
Which, speaking of how well they do it, that actually kind of jots my memory a little bit. If people are concerned about the way e-communications are happening and there doesn't seem to be a lot of faith in the way some of these technologies work, has there been any mention of kind of the hullabaloo that happened a little while ago with the wrapped application? We all know the sort of the Signal app that got hacked, where some of our DoD conversations and other sensitive conversations were leaked. Have you heard any mention of that?
Yes, they have definitely mentioned that as one of their concerns. But just generally, it not meeting their needs and not being, an efficient and easy to use tool.
Yeah, I can imagine the frustration. And that's actually kind of a natural segue to where I wanted to take you next. So I know at NSCP, there's always a lot of buzz around what's sort of coming down the pike from regulators. Have you heard anything related to our regulators? Is the SEC, is FINRA, are they looking at e-communications any differently this year? Have there been any updates on maybe how they're addressing some of these challenges, or just any updates that you've heard about regulators generally?
Now they're continuing to go after firms that are using off-channel communications. That is definitely one of their focuses. Um, that will continue. That will not change. Um, but there haven't been any issues with, per se, what the regulators view of these vendors. Rather, the focus is on the firms themselves and what they're doing to make sure that they have covered all their bases, that they're being compliant, and that their, reps and advisors are being compliant as well.
And that also touches on something that's so important when we think about this idea of vendor due diligence, which I think gets lost sometimes because at the end of the day, I know that firms and the people that are providing these technologies to firms rather have a responsibility to provide them with technology that's safe, that works, but there's also the vendor due diligence piece where the onus is also a little bit on the firms themselves to be going through that process, making sure that the technologies that they're using and engaging with are going to be appropriate, are going to maintain books and records and do everything in a transparent, compliant way. Do you have any thoughts around that?
It would be interesting because currently, vendors are not regulated, but they do have an obligation depending on, what they have provided to the regulators as far as maybe a third party letter of undertaking stating that they will provide the books and records in case the firm doesn't. So far, none of the regulators have gone after any of these, well, this one particular firm that had the issue. Um, that is not something that may not happen in the future. while they're not regulated, if they have provided, which they did, a third-party letter of undertaking stating that they would provide the books and records, it could be held partially responsible for the firm not being able to provide it. I am sure the firms themselves are going through and seeking some type of a mitigation or a lawsuit against the vendor, for putting them in this, precarious position.
You know what this sounds like to me, Cathy? This sounds like
What?
risk and gray area, two things that I know
Oh, yeah,
loved by all people in compliance, especially you, huh?
exactly. Exactly.
Okay, so we're talking a lot about due diligence and about gray areas and about risk. I know you've probably gotten sick of talking about AI at this point, and I know everybody is constantly asking you about AI. We get asked about AI all the time. And so I've asked you a couple of questions about regulators, and let's kind of combine these two ideas. What have you heard about the way that the regulators are going to be addressing AI, if anything at all?
Well, the regulators so far have been amazingly silent on how they're going to be regulating AI, which means that they are, back at their offices preparing what their plan of attack is going to be. I've heard some interesting things stated here, especially around transcriptions of AI, where firms are trying to figure out if there's a way to have a transcription that even though it was done within their facility, it's in their four walls, but not counted as something that's required to be kept for books and records, because there's so much fear about what if somebody says something inadvertently that is now transcribed, that's now part of a record. I would love to hear the regulators take on that, because I can't imagine how firms are going to, put together a policy that says this is not, I get to delete this within 7 days if I deem that I need to delete it. I don't know how that's going to fly, but I have heard that repeatedly here at the conference.
That to me seems like a slippery slope because then what's to prevent them from just deleting something else or maybe erasing another piece of the conversation while making the claim that, oh, this was a transcription mistake or this was not a part of the record or any of those excuses that they might be able to come up
Yeah,
with.
that is part of the problem. Because I mean, what if there's a customer complaint that is, voiced during one of those transcribed calls and you don't want to address it, this way? So you just delete the transcript so that it never existed.
So, along the lines of AI, just to keep pressing you on this a little bit, have you heard or seen any examples of firms that are engaging with AI in a really cool or a really good way?
Cool and good way. No, not yet.
No, not yet.
No. I
Well,
mean, we've talked a lot about, making sure that, there's been a proliferation of people who are saying make sure you use agentic AI. So you want to use agents, not just AI itself. Um, we talked about our Rockbot and how we are using that to educate employees internally. And so there are a lot of firms that are considering that. There are a lot of firms that are using it for customer service. So they'll have some type of a bot agent where it will answer customer service questions based on, the information that's being fed. And we talked about how difficult it is to make sure that that information is kept current so that you know that your bot is using the most current information and not giving somebody an outdated information.
and so that kind of leads me to my next question. I know that AI can feel daunting to a lot of firms, and not just
Oh
AI.
yeah.
I think new and emerging compliance technologies generally can feel a little bit daunting to compliance teams and to firms just as a whole. Have you seen any cool or unique ways, or have you seen any good examples, or maybe do you know offhand maybe how some of these firms can start to build a bridge and connect sort of legacy systems with new and more modern compliance technologies?
So the problem is most of these firms are still struggling with I need to create policies and procedures and have governance around AI before I can actually get to that part of it. And so they're trying to figure out what are our policies going to be? How are we going to do this? How are we going to govern this? And then once they get that in place, they can take the next step to try to figure out how do I get AI to work effectively for our organization?
And circling back to your point from earlier, if regulators still haven't made super clear how they plan to approach AI and what exactly they're going to look at, especially when you consider the books and records considerations of AI and transcripts and sort of image processing and all of the incredible things that AI can do, I would imagine then that that even adds more complexity and more nerves to the compliance teams themselves when trying to figure out how to set up and establish these policies. Have you heard many of those
Oh,
discussions?
Oh yeah, there have been a lot of questions about that. One of the most interesting things I've discovered at this conference is that many compliance professionals are now backing down from the fear that AI is going to take over their jobs. They are starting to come to the realization that the human in the loop is extremely important. So there's been much less fear. Once the fear subsides, then it's easier to develop policies and procedures and governance because you're no longer thinking about what's my next career. You're thinking about how do I make this a success for my organization.
So the good news for compliance teams out there is that Skynet is not here yet. Is that what I'm hearing?
Skynet is not here yet, and it's not likely to be here anytime soon.
Breaking news from NSCP: we are safe from Skynet.
We
Um,
are safe from Skynet.
That kind of leads me to my next question and something else I'm curious about. We've talked a lot about technology, especially the newer technologies like AI and what some of those implications might mean. And that's just one sort of particular example of how maybe the regulators aren't as clear as they could be yet. Firms are still struggling to figure out how they want to use these technologies. What should their policies be around things like AI? Something else that I want to ask you about in relation to all of these things, do you have any advice for new CCOs who are maybe just ascending to the role or just taking over at a new firm? How can they be successful? What things should they do? What characteristics are going to make a good, effective, successful CCO as we enter this new era of AI and automated compliance technology?
Well, so if you're just starting with an organization, you're going to have to learn exactly how the organization operates, where everything is, how siloed they are. Are there 130 different databases that you need to, learn about and figure out what they're doing? Or is there three? And you're going to have to put together a very cohesive plan of how to attack those. And obviously, no compliance officer has enough, resources to do it all at one time. So you're going to have to prioritize it. What's the most important? What touches the most people? And put that priority in so that you can figure out where can AI help you and where should you just leave it alone.
So we're really starting to touch on this theme that I like to talk about, a culture of compliance. We've sort of addressed what a CCO needs to do to be successful, especially in the light of new technologies like AI. In your opinion, Cathy, what is it that is required to become a really successful compliance organization that builds that true sort of culture of compliance? How do you make sure that compliance and effective compliance at that is truly embedded in the DNA of a firm?
I'm going to tell you that compliance starts at the top with the CEO. So all the C-suite, not just the CCO, they have to be bought into this compliance culture, and they need to understand how important it is that their entire culture operates under a compliance umbrella, and for everybody to understand. Because while you have a CCO and while you have compliance officers, compliance is really the responsibility of everybody at the organization. It doesn't just live with the CCO. And the sooner that an organization can help people understand that everybody has a part in making sure that that compliance is a part of the organization, the more successful the program will be.
Do you have any tips or tricks or suggestions? I know that this is something that you've done your entire life. How can they instill that sort of feeling, that knowledge, that understanding that compliance requires everyone?
Well, so first of all, you have to make sure as the chief compliance officer that you have the buy-in from your CEO, your COO, all the operations people. And then it's a matter of training people. And training programs do not have to be boring and dry, compliance talks. You can have training programs that use games and fun things to make it more meaningful for people. I actually know of one firm that actually did a wrap for the younger people to help them understand their code of ethics obligations. And that firm got buy-in from those young people because that compliance officer used a new and creative way to get buy-in from the younger people who were newer to the firm and didn't even understand what compliance was. So I would challenge all compliance officers to find new and unique ways, and you train with everybody. You meet all the heads of all the departments. You build a relationship with them. This is a relationship business. And if you have those relationships with the heads of the different departments, and you make sure that you put together these training programs that are fun, but also get the point across, you will have a much more easier time doing that.
And that makes total sense. Now you've inspired me, so we're about to enter our lightning round, and I'm going to have you wrap all of your responses for me if that's okay.
Okay. No.
Totally kidding. Even though that would be epic, and I'm sure everybody listening to this would love to hear the world famous Cathy spit her fire rhymes. Um, quickly
Yeah,
moving.
this goes up there along with a tattoo, okay?
Hey, next year's user conference, Cathy gets a tattoo. So entering the lightning round, if you had to quickly give your top three takeaways of NSCP, what would they be?
So the most important, the most interesting thing that I heard someone say about AI was that, you build your classifications, you build your prompts, you've got this AI model working. And if you never touch it again, within 12 to 18 months, it will no longer function properly. It has to have ongoing maintenance and, love and care. And you have to keep doing your due diligence on it to make sure it's still doing what you have designed it to do. It is not you plug it in and it's like electricity. It's just there forever. It's going to require ongoing maintenance. And I think people didn't realize that until he actually said it.
And I think that's one of the really cool things about the way that we've built our system because when you think about AI, and if we just extract as far as possible and take the most macro view available, AI is really intended to help save time. It's supposed to remove some of the manual, tedious tasks from your plate to allow you to focus on more prescient issues, on really those things that require more thought and more human intervention. However, if you're having to constantly address sort of your AI systems and your prompting and all of the other things that go into it, that could really be one of those things where it ends up adding more onto a compliance officer's
Oh
plate.
yeah.
Have you seen any examples of that?
Oh, I mean that is total. It is a total possibility, and that is one of the fears here. Also, the second takeaway I got was we need to make sure that all of these tools have a complete and full audit trail for the
Yes.
regulators, because the regulators are going to want to know, what prompts did you use at what period, during what period of time, what were the results, and they're also going to want to know, okay, this thing said it was promissory, but you let it go and you didn't change anything. Why did you do that? And if you don't have the ability to put in a comment with these, AI results to let them know why you thought it was okay and that it wasn't promissory, the regulators are going to have a hard time with that. So, you know, compliance officers need to be really sure that the tool that they're selecting has that full audit trail, the ability to interact with the tool and say yes or no and why.
And you've just hit the nail on the head with what we talk about all the time from our marketing department when we say AI has to be defensible and it has to be
Yes.
explainable. You have to be able to explain not just the end result that you got to, but how you got there, the logic that went into that decision, and you have to be able to defend and explain all of those things. That just you just did a great job of really shedding some light on why we're constantly hammering on that idea. And last but not least, third key takeaway.
Third key takeaway, this conference needs more coffee. So I know that's funny. We need more coffee. But in reality, my third takeaway is we need to make sure as compliance officers that we have the cybersecurity part of the AI down pat. That cybersecurity is crucial. And the industry has actually come out now with new certifications where firms can get certified in their AI procedures and policies. And actually, they're doing audits on it now. So I know Red Oak will be doing an audit next year on our system, but so everyone should know, make sure that you ask for that SOC audit. I think it's an ISO 7000 something audit for AI.
And that's actually a great example because as we sort of transition into the end of our episode here, I really wanted to ask you because NSCP is so full of compliance leaders who are managing sort of compliance operations as well as monitoring and supervision and all of the different pieces that go into keeping your firm safe. What are some takeaways? I know you just talked about AI and about we really need to focus on the IT and the security side of it. What are some additional tools, tricks, advice that you may have for some of these firms in order to make sure that they are doing everything they can to really future proof their compliance policies and operations?
So first of all, I would say the era of I can get by, I have spreadsheets, I can do this, takes me longer, but I can do this. Those days are gone. If you don't use technology now, while the regulators haven't said it, I will predict that the regulators will reach a point, just like they did with email review, where they said you can no longer, rely on not having a system, to keep your emails, books and records compliant and to show that you've actually done the reviews that you're supposed to do. So technology is definitely something that needs to be brought into all organizations. You would actually be surprised the number of firms that I talk to that are large firms that are still using, access databases and spreadsheets for some of their compliance reviews. It's not efficient. Compliance departments are never, staffed to the max. Adding more bodies is, right now the only solution, but that's never a great solution because you got to get the budget for it. So definitely leading into technology vendors and trying to get the best vendor that they can. And if in selection of your vendor, you need to make sure that you do really good due diligence to know what they can do and what they can't do, because you don't want to be in the middle of an implementation and find out they really can't do what the hype said they could.
Yeah, and that's great advice and something I'm sure that every single firm out there really needs to hear. And here's the thing, Cathy, the best, most efficient human beings on this planet make mistakes. That's part of what makes us human.
Oh yeah.
And I think that there's a lot of comfort and security in a effective system, a machine that is properly tuned and set up properly doesn't make mistakes, it doesn't react, and it responds instantly. And I think that that's something that a lot of firms could do a better job leaning into. And last but certainly not least, I promise I'm going to let you get out of here and go get some coffee. If you had one thing for those that were not able to attend NSCP this year to take away and to really think about, what would that one thing be?
Make sure you thoroughly understand AI and all the different ways that it can be used and how it can really help you turn your compliance program into an effective, efficient machine.
And it sounds like that's the key theme. AI, AI, AI. It sounds like that's the buzz at NSCP. I know that's the buzz around our office. I know that's been the buzz with everybody that I've been talking to recently. You heard it here first, folks, from the world famous Cathy herself.